So today I thought we'd take a look at XWindows, because XWindows is fantastic. And KugelPen64 left a comment on one of my earlier videos um, asking about doing apps on different desktops, etc. So I figured it would be a good opportunity to talk about some of the fundamentals of XWindows, maybe a little bit of a touch on the history. I'll probably not get too deep into that, and some of the things I do with it that make it superior to other sort of windowing and remote environments. So up here you'll see here I got two XTerms and my screen recording software here. Simple screen recorder, by the way. I highly recommend it. Um, and you see there's no decorations. I've got focus, following mouse. Clear that out there. But I'm not running a window manager right now. So talk a little bit about the basics of a window manager, the basics of XWindows. We'll get to window managers. What you see here, so the XTerms, this, basically any software you'd run, any application you run is the client. It's a client-server architecture, but in many ways flipped on its head. The X server is what actually handles user input and then displays the visuals back to you. So right here I'm using the Xorg X server, which is generating the picture you see here, and the two XTerms and the screen recorder here are the software. And so you can totally run XWindows without a window manager. In fact, that's advantageous sometimes if you want a static display with no control. So you can bring up an XTerm here and specify geometry. And there's both positive and negative offsets, but we won't get too much into that. But you can then forcibly put things on the screen where you want them and they will run. So I think it's -E. So now we brought up top here and brought that down into the corner. So running without a window manager can be a very useful thing if you want just a display that cannot be interacted with in some fundamental ways. Or I'll often do this very thing to go put some monitoring up on the television here in my home office, so I can put kind of a dashboard up depending on what I'm doing. But this isn't very interesting right now. We can't do a whole lot without a window manager. So let's bring up a window manager. But we're not going to bring up a window manager running locally. We'll bring up one running on the Sunblade. Let me log in here. And we're going to run Open Windows, the OpenLook window manager. So how you pass along to say, hey, it's not local, or even if it is local, you're going to use the display environment variable or the display command line parameter. So we'll use the environment variable because that's force of habit. You can as well pass it along on the command line, and let's actually see if that works. I have no idea whether DT term will work. So as you see here, the notation here, it's IP address or host name or DNS name, and then display, and then screen. I force of habit include the that extra notation, so the .0. Again, force of habit. Sometimes not necessary. So let's see if that can bring up. So there, we brought up a DT term again. So that's a CDE term from the Sun machine. But let's set our environment variable. And let's get Open Windows up and running. Or the OpenLook window manager. So that looks a little nicer. So now I can drop that down. And this is one of the things I work with all the time. This is, in my mind, the best feature, or one of the better features of XWindows. So oftentimes when I'm working, you want to bring up Emacs on a remote machine. You can do this. Now, this is a bit the old style here. You can do this in the same way. So let me get out of here. We will do this a little bit differently. Let me fire up another XTerm. I don't want to kill the window manager. And we'll show, this is the modern way to do it, is to pass an X or a Y. There's some subtle difference there. I don't want to go into that right now. And this is going to be off to one of my more modern machines with SSH available. And let's bring up an XTerm there. Let's take a look at the display variable. You can see it's pointed to localhost. So this is going to do X11 forwarding, so XWindows forwarding over an SSH connection. This is the technique you should be using because it's more secure. There is overhead, and again, when we're dealing with these older machines, I do have SSH on my Sunblade. I also have it on my O2 here, which is another one we're going to be looking at. But the older stuff, SSH, on a VAX, you'll take a day just to generate the keys. So using Telnet, it goes on the side, so it creates a separate connection. With the SSH, it tunnels that effectively, tunnels the X11 traffic, and so that's why you see the display is set to a different server ID here. So 10 on localhost, and it also sets up some other things with the X authority. But let's bring up an XFCE terminal here just to demonstrate that yes, that indeed does work. So now we have bring up XWindow apps, and this is what I'll do oftentimes. You want Emacs running on a remote machine, I'll do this, and boom, you're there. You spawn a lot of XTerms rather than just going in with the terminal. So this has some really good features. Now, X11 remote, as things are more graphically intensive, it'll slow down, and we'll take a look at that here in a couple minutes. So that's the recommended way to do it. But even with this, even though you're SSH'd in, you can still do a display set. And so as you see, Xhost, before I started the video, I set to only allow connections here. So again, we're playing with some things that aren't the best for security. If you're on your local network, it shouldn't be a problem. But again, bear that in mind. So we're going to add 150 here. So we do an Xhost plus. Now if we see our Xhost, so now these two hosts can connect here. And you can do it just a generic Xhost plus to allow everyone to connect in. But there are some security holes. So someone could put stuff up on your display. They could also intercept stuff. They could put in a keylogger, for instance, modified window man. There's nefarious things someone can do. So now we have this XFCE4 terminal now just with the direct connection, so no SSH tunneling. So that's the modern way to do it, would be to use SSH tunneling. And I would recommend doing that, and you won't run into needing Telnet too often. But let's go take a look at bringing up some classic machines, windowing stuff. And I think I touched a little bit on this in the Ultrix video. I think that's what prompted this discussion. So let's start with the VAX. So let me add that here to my access control. And while I'm adding, we'll also add the SGI II. See if display is already set, and it's not. So this is C shell. So we're going to have to do a set environment. And let's bring up the XWindows term. And there we have our XTerm. So if we wanted to do anything here, I find this really particularly useful. I don't have a VMS machine running right now, but if one wanted to bring up, say, the language sensitive editor under VMS, very handy. So let's get rid of that. That's not terribly interesting. But what we will do is take a look at some more interesting stuff, and this is kind of the other part of the video. So that's pretty straightforward to deal with. Remote XWindows, best feature imaginable. I know I don't understand why, say, more of my colleagues don't use this functionality. As I said, for the classic stuff, a little bit of a security hole. If you're using SSH, and you're on your local network, no problems with security, for my mind. But most of these guys will do things like VNC. And VNC is great. It works on a lower bandwidth connection, a higher latency connection. Better. So if you're on over VPN, this XWindows will be really slow. If you're on a 100 megabit LAN, it'll be just fine, except for some modern window managers and apps. So XWindows clients, things that want to put things up on the display, can be a little slow if they're doing a lot more bitmappy type stuff, right? So the network then has to basically transmit all the information to draw things. And so it's primitives for doing squares, circles, so classic stuff here. You see there's no lag here. But let's take a look at something where we will see lag. So we'll log into the O2. And what I discovered with my O2 software bundle I had, there's SoftWindows. Now, one of the things I was trying out, I don't feel like messing with my config on the X here to get my color depth correct. And maybe there's some tricks. I've never used SoftWindows under IRIX before. But let's just fire this up, because this will tie into something else we're going to take a look at on the Sunblade. See, I didn't set my display. And this is TC shell as well. And I'll just middle button paste. Another XWindowsism that is just fantastic, and why other things haven't adopted it, is the middle button paste. So you see here, I get it needs a color map that I could maybe support, but don't really feel like doing this. So see, it's a little garbled, but we'll press the key to run scan disk here. But you see, this isn't so bad, right? So this is doing just fine in terms of updates. It also helps that we're blanking things. But so this SoftWindows lets you, it's basically a full copy of Windows 95. So there's the garbled screen. So not terribly useful, although if I was locally on the O2, it would look just fine. But let's get out of that. But since it is an SGI, so let's be really anachronistic and mix our metaphors here and bring up the tool chest with OpenLook as our window manager. So there we got the SGI Tool Chest, and we can do all the interesting SGI things. Let's get a win term. And so I'm not going to go into this video because it'll get a little long, but you see I get some font issues here. You can actually set these machines up as font servers, so that, and we may have to do that when we move on to the next thing, so you can actually load fonts from a remote machine for fonts you don't have. I got my win term there, and let's see, let's control audio. So there we've got our mixer for the O2 up on my current laptop over XWindows, with the windows being managed by OpenLook running on the Sunblade. So this is just kind of an example of the power of XWindows, that you don't see other places. I don't know. I'm not a Microsoft guy. Maybe on Windows you can do something similar, but I doubt it, that you can mix the output of applications from everything from Ultrix from 1993, Solaris from the late 90s, on Linux with local Linux stuff, remote Linux, basically everything that supports X. And these are different versions of XWindows running on each of these, clients, different X clients that are being displayed. I do have to pause right now and apologize that this video is a little rambly. It's kind of freeform. I didn't really have a good idea what I was going to do, but I figured let's talk about XWindows. So I do apologize if it is a little rambly. But we're just playing around here. So there is that. Let me make sure my display here is still set. So while we're in the vein of talking about Microsoft stuff here, a couple of other fun bits and pieces for Microsoft. This is one thing that I did not know until well after it was useful, but I grabbed a copy of it when I had the opportunity. So I've loaded it up here. Is Microsoft released Internet Explorer for Solaris. So I guess they did it for other Unices as well, but I couldn't believe it. Internet Explorer for Solaris. So that is, I found that incredibly impressive. That such a thing existed. Again, it's Internet Explorer 5, so it is antiquated. But this may have been on people's desks. I have no idea how popular it was. Like I said, I found out about it talking to a sysadmin in the 2007 or something, I think. So this is from what I guess a few years earlier, and had long been superseded. But he used it to access some of those poorly designed web apps that wanted Internet Explorer. So that is, I think, a fun little distraction that actually exists. So I figured since we're going to be taking a look at some Microsoft-ish stuff, would pull that up. So let me exit this. So we want to quit that. Close on, and in case you don't know, close on OpenLook just minimizes. I'll minimize a couple of these things. So the other thing to take a look at here is my Sunblade has a PCI coprocessor card that has a Celeron. It's got like a 700 megahertz Celeron on it. And if I had a copy of some Windows between Windows NT 4 and Windows XP, which embarrassingly I have no copy of Windows, and whereas I can track down and talk to people who've been sysadmins for a while and get a copy of Ultrix, Windows requires a key, as to the best of my recollections. So it'd be kind of pointless, but I may end up with one eventually. And I think this is fantastic. So it's the SunPCI. It's a PC on a card. And I obviously have it open on another machine. Let's see. Nope, that doesn't like it. Let me just kill all these. Sorry, I didn't realize I had it open on another machine. We'll just kill this guy here. Hopefully that will work. Yeah, that should do it. And so now we're bringing up the SunPCI coprocessor interface. And this will be a good example to show the poor performance of XWindows doing detailed graphics. And this is an example of where the font path is not set correctly. So we're going to have to take a look at the font path here. So I'm going to need to add over TCP the font path. So font servers are typically on 7100. That is another video unto itself, is going to be talking about the font cache, font servers, etc. But we will. Okay. I do have that now. Okay, so hopefully this yields better results now that I have the fonts. So this X client needed fonts that my local X server couldn't provide. And so that X set lets you set fonts. And here it is coming up, SunPCI II, 733 megahertz Celeron with 128 megs of memory. It takes little laptop memory sticks, so I probably should get some more laptop memory for it. And not much going on here. Like I said, it comes with Digital Research DOS built in. Otherwise, you have to provide your own Windows. I have read some reports of some people getting PC-style BSDs and maybe Linux from some years ago to install correctly. It creates a hard disk image under your home directory, and also typically it can share the network with your one of your network interfaces on your Sun machine, or it has its own twisted pair, so it's 10100 interface. As you see here, it's bringing up the display here. You can also put the display out to its own VGA connector. And when I had one of these in my Sunblade 100, one point it wasn't this fast. I think it was the 600 megahertz model. It was very handy to be able to do things like all the Microsoft tools, because ridiculous places stick with Exchange and require Outlook. So not very interesting here. You just get a DOS window, but it brings your home directory under drive H, and I think that's pretty fantastic. And like I say, if you're running Windows, you get full graphical, you get mouse capture. You can output the video to its own monitor, or use this. There is a little bit of latency when we're doing it remotely, and we'll pull up Jumpman Lives to demonstrate. And again, modern display, so I have 24-bit color depth here on my X server, and the X clients that I'm running, and we saw that a little bit with the SoftWindows, SoftPC Windows, whatever the thing on the SGI was. It didn't like my color depth. This is also not going to like the color depth, but it's at least going to try. So this wants a different sort of color map with a different color depth. So this expects a 256 color display essentially. But you see there the classic intro Apogee game. And yeah, a beginner. I'm going to die very quickly because the latency is so heavy, but you can see how it's, maybe you can, but it's, playing it is impossible because it's very jerky. And so see, kind of pointless, and the colors are off. Again, expects a different color map than this X server provides. However, if I were to connect its own monitor or dedicated monitor for the SunPCI video output, there would be no problem because it would have an S3 or Trident or whatever old school style SVGA chipset was there and could run Windows NT 95, all those different classic things, all the way up to XP. Though I think with 128 megs of memory, that might be a little shy. But what I wanted to demonstrate here was really the kind of latency in the display. As you see, it took some time to redraw that as Jumpman moves along. It takes some time for the redraw because it's having to transfer this as bitmap data rather than more vector data, like well, this would be text that's displayed with the font. Bring up WinTerm. So rather than these more structured and vectored elements, it actually has to draw all these across the network. So that is the SunPCI II Pro or PCI Pro 2, which I think is a handy little device. And they made these coprocessor cards going all the way up to I think 1.4 or 1.6 gigahertz PC style CPUs, which is pretty impressive. So you could get your Spark station or your Ultra Spark station or your Sunblade or your Ultra 45 kitted out to have a couple of Spark CPUs and an Intel style CPU, an x86 style CPU, which made it a very, very powerful machine. And even on the low ends, I remember these weren't terribly expensive. Like I said, I had one in the late 90s, early 2000s on my Sunblade 100. Whereas on the O2, the SoftWindows was actually software emulation, and that was running surprisingly quickly on a 200 megahertz MIPS R5000. What else do I have to throw out here? Hopefully this has kind of been informative. Sorry if it was a little all over the place. I really just wanted to have a play around and a demo of kind of how I work with XWindows and why I love it so much, and probably couldn't switch unless another windowing system had that same sort of network display capability. It's really impressive, and this is something that goes back a long time. XWindows is pretty old. We're talking, I don't know, the 80s. And the 80s saw some other interesting windowing systems that competed in some ways were better. I mean, there were things like news. There was PostScript based displays, which maybe had processing power been better, would have won out. I mean, everything done in PostScript. That's a pretty cool idea, right? But for what it is and the capabilities, I think XWindows was fantastic, and I don't see the need to replace it. And agreeably, I'm a kind of retro guy. The stuff I do is more on the coding side. I write code, work with text a lot. Terminals. I'm not doing a lot of graphical stuff, so maybe I would have a different idea. My daily driver window managers for actual work are TWM for my dual screen and Motif for my laptop here. XFCE for this big laptop, just because I use this one a little bit less. So I don't know if I think XWindows needs a replacement. Does it need to continually be improved? Absolutely. But yeah, that is the gripe, is people should write software a little bit better. I think VirtualBox 4 was nice and snappy over X, right? Over a remote XWindows display. VirtualBox 5, I don't know. They changed something on how they're drawing not the actual VM data itself, but how they're drawing the the configuration windows and stuff. Slowed it down incredibly. A couple other tips throughout. What I do typically when I'm doing remote access. As I say, for modern stuff, I use an SSH X11 forwarding. And I'll typically, if they're modern machines, I'm going to turn on compression. So a capital C, and I'm going to choose a lightweight cipher. Uh, and so people may say, hey, don't have any of the lightweight, more easily crackable ciphers available. Again, if you don't have them as the default, you can then pick them for an application to say, do XWindows over. And it shouldn't be too difficult. So I don't know. Leave a comment below if this was interesting. If you'd like to see more SGI stuff, more Suns, if you'd like me to get a copy of some sort of Windows and screw around with Windows on the SunPCI, because I had half a mind to relive, college days of Windows NT 4 and Visual Studio for awful programming classes. But I don't know where I'd track down a copy of Windows NT 4 these days. But do let me know in the comments. Who used an SGI in the 90s? I mean, they're pretty cool. I've forgotten a lot about them, even though I had one on my desk briefly, and then another one on another desk also briefly. I'd forgotten how not only goofy they were, but also kind of fun. And I think coming at it from a regular user, not a power user, a technical user, a sysadmin, it's every bit as easy. And you get this little tool chest. This is sort of like a start menu sort of thing. Everything you need is right there, and the stuff makes sense. There's bongs that go off when you start things up, and it's very user friendly, I would think, for a non-Unix person. So I wonder why it didn't really take off. Probably because they're too expensive. But anyway, I've rambled on long enough. Hope this was interesting, and hopefully I'll get something else out soon.